Welcome, 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 everyone. Welcome. As we're logging in, go ahead, let us know your name and where you're joining us from. Good to see you all. Okay, wow. So we got Cynthia from Texas, Carmen from Colombia. Welcome, welcome. Is that Columbia like Ohio or Columbia, South America? Let me know. Vancouver, awesome. British Columbia, New Jersey, Ontario, Canada. Welcome, welcome. Kenya, hi, Judith. She's in some of my other classes. Oh my God, it's late. All I can say is that it's probably late, definitely late in Kenya. More from Canada. Canada is showing up. Great to have you here, LA, Seattle, Georgia, Vermont, Israel. Hi, Sandy. She's been in some of my other classes too. South America, Carmen from South America, awesome. Sandy from Israel, Chicago, LA, Texas, Kentucky, San Diego. Two from San Diego, love it. Washington, British Columbia, Louisville, LA, LA. I'm LA based, as you all know. A couple from Oregon, Philadelphia, more from San Diego. San Diego has a lot of MFT programs. Coachella, yeah, Coachella. Yeah, she out having fun there. I don't know if that's still going on or not. Vero Beach. I don't even know where Vero Beach is. Suli, very cool. Everyone, welcome, welcome. Florida. It's in Florida. She answered right away. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk about IBCT, and IBCT is one of two couples therapy approaches that have been evidence-based and recognized that way for several decades. But here's the backstory. So back in the day, about 20, 30 years ago, the US military was looking to find a couples therapy approach. As you probably know, around the world, military families, they have a lot of extra stressors and problems. And so they were looking to hire one person to do all of the couples therapy for the military. And they interviewed Sue Johnson from Canada, who developed emotionally focused couples therapy. And as you know, Sue, it's a very, well, as the name says it all, it's very emotion focused. She's really like helping people process their emotions. She has people dig deep into their attachment issues. And then they interviewed um, uh, Andy Christensen and learned about integrative behavioral therapy, behavioral couples therapy, and they were like, "Yeah, Sue versus Andy, who's kind of very rational, and we're going to do this assessment. It's a D. D stands for da 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 da, and we're going to talk through your differences." They're like, "Yeah, we're going to do IBCT. We're going with that one. We don't think the military and the veterans are going to do the EFT." So what has happened basically is that Andy Christensen and Neil Jacobson, who originally started the research with Andy, and Neil died very early, I think, in his career, one would say. So Andy's been doing the work for the last 20 years or so. That they've been working with military, VA and military, and doing all of the training and all the research with military couples. And so they've just in the last 5, 10 years started to do more training to the general audience. So we know less about IBCT, not because the research isn't as good, but because they got this huge contract that basically took up their careers and where they did all their research. So, but I think what you're going to find that whether or not, you go get trained and certified in IBCT, there is some really important ideas here in IBCT about how to do couples therapy, how couples work, and this I think is very eye-opening and very, very helpful. I'm a huge fan of EFT, but I'm also a huge fan of IBCT because I think they both give different tools to working with, in my opinion, the toughest type of client, which is a couples, was working with couples. So let's go ahead and jump in. So those of you who are grad students who need, you may benefit at the end of this workshop or live session, you will get in a letter of attendance that you can give to your universities to say you went to professional training. You just have to be live here to do it because we were getting hundreds and thousands of, hundreds of requests per month, which overwhelmed our system. So you can download it at the end. I will put the link in the chat, but you have to stay till the end of the hour. So for everyone listening, you can use this QR code, which will take you to the web page. It's my book web page on Therapy That Works Institute/books. And there's a form. You can just put your name in there and it'll bring you to a web page where you can download worksheets. The IBCT kind of case conceptualization form is there, but there are also case conceptualization, treatment plan, a whole bunch of clinical forms for all of the theories, both traditional counseling as well as couple and family therapy. There's a lot there, and that's where you would get the code to go with this workshop. Okay. So, hopefully, if you're listening, you are somewhat familiar with my unifying framework. And if not, I'm going to give you a really quick tour. So, the unifying framework has four basic levels: behavioral, emotional, cognitive, and societal. And most approaches focus on one or two of these areas. And so, IBCT, you will see, focuses a lot, obviously, on the behavioral, as it's in the name. And then also the cognitive piece. So you'll be noticing there's a lot of focusing on behavioral and cognition, which makes it a nice complement to EFT, right? If you have a couple that's not responding to EFT, because they really focus on that emotional level, the behavioral IBCT kind of works on couples issues in the opposite. And that's why I love this unifying framework. It helps you conceptualize how all the different theories can kind of fit together. And so I find it is working on a different area. And for both approaches, you kind of have to work on bringing the societal narratives into the conversation. But this kind of just gives you a compare and contrast for other approaches. Okay. So, in a nutshell, the absolute least you need to know about IBCT. So, it is part of what is considered a third wave of cognitive behavioral family therapy, or third wave of cognitive therapy. And IBCT did start primarily as a behavioral couples therapy approach. It's how it started. And what Christensen and Jacobs found was that, we got progress within 6 months, but it wasn't sustained. And to their credit, they said, you know what? Yes, we can market ourselves as an evidence-based treatment, but the research is showing us there's something missing, because even though we get the couples to a much more happy place, they don't stay there. And they were trying to figure out what's missing. And that's what that integrative piece is. And so there's a lot more of this integration of some cognitive elements, but also this unique concept of acceptance. And this concept of acceptance, accepting your partner the way they are, and that is what Andy and Neil found, was that there was this needing to accept your partner at a deeper level, and who they are and how they are in the world was critical. And that when they did that, change lasted longer. These couples got better and stayed better. And that concept of acceptance, to my knowledge, they were not reading Buddhist texts at the time, but it aligns with what's called the third wave of CBT, which we are most familiar with, that wave with mindfulness concepts. And we know that dialectic behavior therapy and IBCT are two of the major current CBTs, ACT as well, acceptance and commitment therapy, that these theories are integrating into CBT this concept of accepting rather than trying to fix every irrational thought, trying to reprogram every, non-functional behavior, which is the logic of first and second wave. Well, first wave is behavioral, second wave is cognitive, right? So both of those waves, it was kind of fixing what's not working. This third wave of CBT talks about bringing accepting and not fighting your symptoms as much, and learning how to relate to the symptom in a different way for those symptoms or those behaviors that can't be easily and readily changed. So it's an acceptance-based approach, which makes it third wave, which really puts it into like cousins with, like I said, dialectic behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. There's the acceptance word, right? Or some of the other third waves that you may be familiar with, where there's this acceptance rather than correcting a problem, thought, or behavior. So that is one of the things that's really unique about this approach. And it's based on the assumption that all couples experience areas of difference and disagreement. And this reminds me of what Gottman frequently says, is that, when you marry a person, you marry a certain set of problems. And because we know that from his research, 69% of couples, or 69% of couple arguments, are about the same basic personality differences. And so when you are picking a partner, or when your clients are picking a partner, you just have to remember you're picking a particular set of problems, and that are personality differences, because we cannot clone ourselves. And even if you look at, genetically, identical twins, they're different people too. So even if we could clone ourselves, we would still not be the same, see the world in the same way because we have different life experiences. And so this is one of the assumptions. There are going to be these points of difference. And sure, John Gottman's research also says something very similar. There are these perpetual problems that all couples have, these areas of difference, or what they're called here, and that learning how to deal with them skillfully is important. So what's different with distressed couples is that how they engage these differences is just less effective. And so what happens, and I'm going to flip it into a little Gottman here, but it's because I work on unifying frameworks. I like to see how the pieces interconnect. So, and Gottman calls it gridlock. So couples who do not do well get into gridlock, which is they hit those same differences. I don't know, it could be extroverted, introverted, more emotional, more thinking, whatever it might be. When they hit those, they get into gridlock, they get stuck, they don't compromise, they start seeing these differences as personal attacks, and it gets ugly. So those are that describes what happens to distressed couples from this approach, is that there are these differences and they get combative, basically. In a nutshell, they get combative rather than continually coming back and trying to work it through and trying to compromise from a different angle, trying a different solution again, but having a little more patience and grace and willingness to keep working at it and working at these differences, rather than personalizing them, as we'll talk about. And so the primary focus of this approach is to help couples accept their differences and learning not to take differences personally. And so if there's one thing you remember from this training, it's this last bullet point here, that when you can depersonalize couple conflict, you really can make huge strides in couples therapy. One of the most strangest things I discovered in my work is that when I work with my most difficult high conflict couples, where typically there is someone who would, has, personality features or full-blown disorders, right? So we're talking working with people who have either narcissistic or borderline or sociopathic tendencies. They tend to be very, very conflictual, high conflict. And one of the strangest things that seems to work for me is I do a very kind of deconstructionist kind of postmodern use of the Myers-Briggs, not the 16 types, but the 8 functions, and understanding how when your partner zigs, when you zig, they zag. Because if you're a sensing type who focuses on details and your partner's intuitive and looks at big pictures and patterns, you know, you're going to have totally different way of perceiving the world and the events in it. And so there will be times when you're opposite from your partner where they truly look crazy. And it is because they're using a different system of logic. And so oftentimes that has been the most helpful thing with my most difficult couples. And it's because it is depersonalizing conflict. It's like, oh, they're not out to get me. Their brain just kind of notices patterns instead of details, and vice versa. Oh, this isn't a personal, attack. It's like, oh, then I can work and now I can compromise. Okay. So, but otherwise they're debating, right? Who's right, who's wrong. And I couldn't get them to de-escalate. And I think some of it is the Myers-Briggs has all this externalized validity. I mean, we know it's not the most scientific of, measures, but there's a lot of, it's very practical. It can be used in practical, useful ways. But yeah, because, oh yeah, I've heard of this, and oh, that makes sense. And oh, it's not a personal attack, and you've convinced me. And so then they start working with each other. It's the most bizarre thing. So I do work a lot with couples. I love working with couples, but boy, they are the ones who force me to keep learning, keep growing, keep stretching, and staying creative. They keep me on my toes. Okay, so let's take a look at a big picture, the overview of treatment. So typically weekly sessions are recommended, and to provide continuity and focus and to not lose the thread. And if you work a lot with couples, a lot can happen in a couple's week and two lot. A lot can happen in a couple's week and two in a couple's life in 2 weeks. And so those big gaps sometimes, whew, you don't know what's coming in the next week. But they do say you can make this treatment flexible to meet the needs of couples. And the fundamental goal of this approach is to increase each partner's ability to understand and accept their partner as an individual. So you're really trying to understand who your partner is at an individual level. And then from that, enabling the couple to work together to change patterns and improve relationship quality. So, yes, we're working on acceptance, but there's also change. And so you're doing both. But they found in their early research, just focusing on the change without doing any acceptance didn't work for couples. And so in this approach too, there is usually, one or two sessions to assess. They often will meet individually with each person to just rule out things like, how committed are they to this? Are there any affairs? Is there any domestic violence? Those sorts of things to make sure they're suitable. Um, but from that, then they're going to kind of move them through this assessment phase and then to intervention. Okay, so let's look at the case conceptualization. So it is a comprehensive, it is a structured process. In fact, they will spend, usually 2, 3 sessions doing the assessment, and they will come in and walk through it all with the client, kind of presenting it to them in a more formal way. So this is a very different field than EFT, which is much more process oriented. There are both conjoint and individual sessions. But the main thing is functional assessment. And functional assessment, if you haven't seen my cognitive behavioral couple and family lecture, is one of the hallmarks of couple and family versions of CBT versus traditional individual CBT. In a functional assessment, you are looking at how the system is functioning, and you are looking at systemic dynamics, although sounds very different than a lot of the other systemic approaches. So one of the things you're doing in your functional assessment is looking for areas of dissatisfaction. You're also looking at their relationship history. What was their early attraction? What was that about? What was dating life like? And when did these problems start developing? And where are things currently? So you're getting the full history of a couple. And I will let you know that it's always a bad sign when you ask couples about how they met and what they found attractive, what drew them to each other in the beginning. If they can't come up with anything positive, that's always a bad sign. So this is a real important piece of information to always get. And they use these 6 guiding questions in their conceptualization and assessment phase. So the first is, how distressed is this couple? And there are some formal measures like the dyadic assessment. Dyadic assessment. I'm losing the words and I use the measure myself. So, but how distressed are they? There are formal measures as to when a couple hits this, distressed for research purposes. And so are they mildly distressed? Are they moderate? Is it severe? And how far has this gone? And so just getting a sense of that. And usually the length of time that they have been distressed gives you a good sense of this. I want to also remind you, if you're familiar with Gottman's work, that he talks about the distance and isolation cascade. So when relationships have been in a distress for a long, long time, at a certain point, you're going to see less conflict and more distance and isolation. Sue Johnson, talks about the burned out pursuer. So you can see, I guess, I clearly am a unifying framework person, but you can see that all the couples research finds very similar patterns. So just because they're not fighting right now doesn't mean that they're not highly distressed. So it's how much tension, how much closeness. So you're looking for both the level of overt conflict, kind of quiet tension, and just, is there a sense of being burned out? Because there's a burned out isolation. No one's even trying anymore. That's actually a worse sign than active fighting. Because at least if they're actively fighting, they're both trying, right, to get their needs met in one way, not usually the best way, but they're still trying to stay connected in a way, and that you can get to a point where no one's even trying. The next question is, how committed is each member of the couple to the relationship? And so this often is best assessed one-on-one with a client. But how much does each person want this relationship to succeed? And you may not get the straight answer to that in a couple sessions. So that's why often just in the early phase, similar to Sue Johnson's work that you do half a session or one individual full session with each person. And that's one of the things you're assessing for is how much does someone want this to work? Because sometimes people are on the fence, like one person is like, well, if we can make it work, but I don't think it's going to. Or other people, where the other partner and I'd be like, no, this is so important. We've got kids. We've got to make this work. So how committed is each person? And then the other thing they're looking for this is where we're getting into content is what are the issues dividing the partners? Is it around expression of, communicating, emotional needs? Is it around sex? Is it around money? Is it around kids? Household chores, several of those. But what are the primary issues that divide the couple? And you're looking for themes, a single theme or multiple themes that might even be playing out across multiple areas of life. So maybe around the kids and household tasks, those two are often correlated, where there's some different, themes that kind of, where one person maybe always feels like the other person isn't doing their half, or the other person isn't helping, or the other person isn't listening to them. So you're listening for more general themes across all of these areas. And then you want to really understand why these issues are such a problem for them. Okay. So, let's just say that the conflicts over division of childcare and household chores, right? Pretty normal. Everyone kind of argues about these things. And it's very easy to just assume why that would be upsetting to one partner or the other. But you really want to dig a little bit deeper and understand, stereotype in a heterosexual relationship would be the woman feels like she's overburdened with childcare and household tasks, and it makes her feel very alone and unappreciated because that type of work is no one really appreciates it. I just think most of us don't, unless you do it yourself, right? And on the flip side, then you want to understand, where the husband is on why he does what he does, why he doesn't do what he doesn't, do, and what his role means to him and how he sees the housework, right? And what's going on. And common one I will hear is like she has totally unrealistic expectations of what the house should look like. You can't have a speck of, you can't leave a breadcrumb on the counter, without wiping it up immediately or you'll be chastised. So you can get into, where people are at, and you want to understand not just the areas, I want to understand the themes and then why specifically these themes are upsetting to these two people sitting in front of you, being careful not to fill in the blanks for them. And they do something called a deep analysis, and I'll walk you through that, which is kind of the core of all of this. And then what are the strengths and things that are holding them together? So why are they still in this relationship? And what can treatment do to help them? So these are the 6 kind of guiding questions that the clinician is using to guide the early phase assessment in this approach. So let's look at the deep analysis. So if you've been following IBCT for years, which you probably haven't, but if you have, they used to do a different analysis. They just kind of shifted to calling it the deep analysis in the last few years or so. And so if you have my 4th edition of Mastering Competencies, you'll notice I have the deep analysis. The editions before that had their older version. So deep analysis is a newer description. I think as they've been moving this to general the therapist audience, not so much a military audience. They kind of simplified, streamlined, and so this is the easier way to do it. But if you have an older book, you will see something different in the book. So the case formulation is shared with the couple in the 4th session. So there's actually, it's a manualized treatment. It's an evidence-based treatment. So 4th session is typically where this will happen. And they're using the first 3 sessions, which generally include some time with each person individually to come up with this formulation. And then in the 4th session, it's like the therapist starts with, this is the formulation, the deep analysis. So the D stands for differences and incompatibility. So kind of looking at where the two of them are not matching up. And obviously how you phrase this is important. And you're looking for themes, the basic underlying focus on conflict of this conflict. And so So you're looking for core themes and differences, and often this is going to boil down to values and or attachment needs, right? So, but this basic underlying focus of the conflict is what you're trying to highlight. And you know you've got that theme right, when you see it reappear when they're talking about money or sex or the kids or work or whatever. There's a theme of when they have conflict, general positions. And this parallels a lot of Sue Johnson's work as well. Then the first E stands for emotional reactions, sensitivities, and vulnerabilities. So this is looking when, each person feels misunderstood by their partner. What are their reactions? What are their sensitive points? And boy, you know, working with one of my couples who tends to be more volatile, and those sensitivities, I know them too. I'm like, it's a joke almost. I'm like, I can tell you, when you do this, we have fun with that, which is part of accepting it, right? Is being able to name them and honor them, and just knowing the more sensitive points and just the vulnerabilities, the things that hurt more than ever. More, like I have some couples, we're comparing them either to a mom or a dad who was very negative in their life. That comparison, you've started a war. So just understanding and naming all of those things, right? And understanding the source and getting down to why comparing, let's say, your partner to their mom, is so painful to them, and naming that and understanding that. And so everyone kind of understands why those things hurt so much, or why when you know, not helping out with the chores, let's say around the house, or feeling like you're getting left to do all the work alone. There's probably a history and a source for that pain as well. The second E is looking at external circumstances and stressors. And so that is else is going on in their world, right? They might have a high needs child. One of them might have a high demand job that takes a lot of their time and energy, or they might have a parent who is ill. One of them might have a parent who's ill. You can just look at all of the volatility in society around us, right? So looking at all of those external circumstances and stressors that can be their work life, their family of origin, what's going on in society, their role in society, but looking at all of these other stressors that are affecting each person individually and the couple, as a pair. And these are things that you're focusing and really listening most in on, the ones that exacerbate conflict between the two of them. An obvious one over the last decade or so here in the United States is people being, politically, we've become so divided that this has been a huge point of exacerbating conflict for couples. And then finally, looking at patterns of communication and interactions. Here we're going straight back to classic systems theory, if you're trained as a family therapist and listening to this. So you're looking at the systemic interaction pattern, what are things like when things are neutral or calm? How does tension rise? What does the tension for this couple look like at its worst? And then how do they get back to normal? And as always with couples and families, the big question is, do they sweep it under the rug, or do they talk through it to get some resolution? So you're doing the classic systemic analysis. So the deep analysis, is, you're looking at those core differences, looking at the emotional reactivity, looking at the external stressors, and then finally the patterns of communication, which is that systemic dynamic, and understanding how the conflict specifically unfolds. And generally, it is integrative behavioral couples therapy. You are looking very much at behaviorally what is going on in that cycle, very focused on that behavioral level. And if you recall, this whole approach started as behavioral couples therapy, and they had to add the integrative piece to get that acceptance in. So when they assess that communication pattern, is very focused on that behavioral level. So let's go ahead and look at the doing, or the interventions. So they conceptualize intervening in this approach in three basic ways. This makes total sense. One is acceptance strategies. So where do you need to increase acceptance of their partners? The second is tolerance, being able to tolerate some of this tension and difference between them. And then the third is change strategies. And so trust me, if you've worked with couples much, they all kind of hope the secret hope of everyone who goes to couples therapy is we're going to come in here and the therapist is going to realize how right I am, how wrong my partner is, and change my partner. That is, there's usually, I'm joking, obviously, and exaggerating, but there's a certain amount of everyone always kind of hopes that maybe, this therapist can just come in here and fix my, talk some sense into my partner. And it's realizing that, um, working on that acceptance and tolerance is just as important as the change strategies. So let's jump in and talk about each one. So they talk about two basic strategies to help couples increase their to foster acceptance. So the first is empathetic joining. So formulating each person's expression of pain without blaming or accusing. And if you are new to couples therapy or haven't done it yet, or if you've done it and found it really hard, I will let you know one of the things you learn very early in your first few couple sessions is that if a client comes in and tells you how angry they are at their partner, you don't just summarize, you're feeling really mad, at your partner right now, like you would in traditional Carl Rogers human-centered humanistic approaches. You don't ever summarize back the very kind of hostile or angry, negative, accusing. Um, and you do this little jujitsu thing where you reframe it, or they're calling it reformulate it, to highlight the pain and the hurt, the feeling misunderstood. But you also take their pain and you phrase it in ways that their partner can hear and understand it and digest it better. And you just can't reframe and reflect the way you would with an individual, because with an individual, you can reflect that way. It may actually damage their relationship. That's another workshop and lecture. But just know when you're joining empathetically with a couple, you have to be very careful how you reflect back to emotions, and how you phrase it, how you formulate it, because it needs to feel like if you reframe back to one person that you feel very betrayed by your partner, and the partner may feel very like you've already taken their side, and you're like, I'm just summarizing what my client said, what your spouse said, right? And the other person can be going like, you're taking their side already. It's the first 5 minutes of the session, and they don't understand Rogerian reflection and summaries, and so it's very easy to have that go haywire very quickly in couples therapy. So this joining, building a relationship, you're empathetic, but you're being careful to do it in a way where neither person feels blamed or accused. And that, my friends, is a tricky balance to find. And then they use this concept called unified detachment, which again, now this is separates very different. This is very different from like Sue Johnson's approach, but you're wanting the couple to, well, maybe it's not actually, because Sue Johnson she does do this in her own way. But unified detachment is helping the couple have enough emotional distance for them to step back and intellectually analyze their conflicts. Now, Sue Johnson wouldn't go as far as to say that they're going to intellectually um, and analyze their conflicts, which we are doing here with IBCT. In EFT, emotionally focused couples therapy, you're trying to, instead of make your partner be the enemy, you're trying to have that pattern be the pattern be the enemy, um, which is very similar to what's going on here. I really cannot help myself from finding a unifying framework for everything I do, huh? All theories. It's kind of what I love to do to see where they're similar. But this process, I think my mind goes here because I'm like, oh yeah, Sue Johnson does it this way, right? And so to underscore all of that is that it's important to be able to get the couple to pull back enough to see the pattern in a somewhat more cognitive way, because usually they're highly emotional, highly volatile. The emotions are running too intense, and then we need to have a little bit of analysis, or I think EFT would call it reflective distance or something like that, by being able to step out and to get some distance from the conflict, from their pattern, so that they can see it differently. And so this is a real important thing. And I like how they actually say it here in IBCT. They talk about unified detachment. So they're unified as a couple, stepping back and looking at in analyzing their conflicts using the deep analysis that you give them as a therapist here. So the acceptance is then helping them to, hear what's going on with their partner, kind of accept that this is what it is, kind of understanding using this intellectual analysis to see how each person's behaviors are part of this negative dynamic that they've created together, and kind of being able to accept, some of the personality differences, right, between them. And when you accept some of these differences, I just want to also say here, this doesn't mean you are accepting abusive behavior. This doesn't mean you're accepting, really unhealthy interaction, and that you're not going to determine, through this process that maybe you need to leave this relationship, or a person may decide that. It doesn't mean you're putting up with, really bad behavior from a partner. But it does mean that, accepting, right, your partner as they are is, for example, if, when you are actually dealing with physical violence, intimate partner violence, um, domestic violence, acceptance, believe it or not, is important, because what acceptance means in that situation is that you're not going to keep doing the loop of honeymoon phase denial followed by, abuse, going back into honeymoon phase denial. And so acceptance can be is that I am with someone who has been violent with me on multiple occasions. And when you accept that reality, rather than kind of get swept into, the hopeful stage that kind of puts you into denial, especially when a clear pattern's been established. Acceptance is also acknowledging that now you have responsibility for what you do with that reality and accepting that reality. So it can also mean to not slip into denial. But you're using this acceptance to see some of these differences. And, for example, recently I was working with a couple, and one was very frustrated with the other because, they worked in a business where they signed a non-disclosure. And, one partner felt like, well, yeah, they both work in a business where there's non-disclosures, right? Statements or those sorts of things. And one partner felt like, yeah, but we can talk with each other about these things. And the other person was like, no, I signed an NDA and I'm not telling you I'm not going to violate it even with you, because you weren't part of the contract and part of the clause, right? Two different ways, I get the doctor, a lawyer, not me, to figure out what's legal in this situation, right? And so I didn't weigh into that, but just realizing that you have this partner who took the NDA to the letter that he had signed, right? To the word, and I said, I'm assuming your husband has also got a lot of integrity. And when he says he's going to do something, he follows through, and he's very reliable. And so he's got all these great qualities. Along with that is that when he signs an NDA, he means it. And so we all have these qualities in ourselves, and every strength is a weakness or liability in another area, right? And every strength we have, can be a liability or a negative thing in a different context. So all the things that a person may be attracted to their partner for, all those qualities, I don't know, they might be fun and vivacious and, warm and empathetic, right? But they may like always lose the car keys, never know when the, next whatever date night is or whatever, and they're just kind of, floating through life. So that could be the other half of that. And so, also just understanding it is the nature of humanity and human personality that we can have strengths, and any strength in one area is going to be annoyance in another. And learning to accept that in your partner, and that you don't get to cherry pick and choose where, when, and how they show up in the world, in that way. So tolerance building is the next major intervention. Um, So, I like the phrasing of this: requires partners to let go of fruitless conflicts and attempts to change one another. And there are certain things where, like the extroverted, let's say, and the introverted, partner. There's one partner who's super extroverted. Every time they go to a party, it takes 20 minutes to say goodbye. And they would go to a party every 7 days a week. I have one retirement couple where literally is 5 or 6 nights a week they wanted to be out with friends or doing an activity, where the other partner was like, more than one time a week out with friends to dinner is all I can take. Like, that's all I can do. I'll have dinner with the family. I'll have dinner with her, but I can't like 6 nights a week with every social group, I couldn't do it. So realizing that there's just some of these differences here, right? And so how do they negotiate that rather than make a wrongness out of each person's preference for, how to spend time in their, this was a couple in retirement. So when they were working, it wasn't an issue. They were all working. But now that they're in retirement, one has a totally different vision of how they want to spend their evenings than the other. And so realizing that trying to change your partner on certain things like that is just going to be pointless. Um, so some examples of how you would do this is learning how to highlight positive aspects of negative behaviors, kind of like I would just give the example of someone who doesn't share all the, NDAA disclosures at work. They have a lot of integrity, and you're gonna, um, if you want someone who's got a lot of integrity, it's part of the package, right? If you have a partner who likes to look nice, right? They may take an hour to get ready to go out to dinner. Okay. It's just a wait you got to do. So just kind of understanding some of those differences. There's actually practicing some of the negative behaviors to desensitize and reframe. And so this sounds weird, but some of what that might look like is, one of my couples who's been very high conflict for a long time. I mean, they literally, one cannot not exhale, and the other one, during a conversation, the other one not just feel judged. I'm like, okay, so, you can practice like you just, partner A just, ask for something. Partner B is like processing it. And part of their processing is this pause, right? Note the lack of enthusiasm, which gets partner A to feel judged or, oh my God, we're going to start this, kind of going down this negative, spiral. And, I'm coaching them like, it's okay if they sigh. Okay. You got to give them sigh, time to process what they're going to say. Who knows? They might be trying to think of a nice way to say how they disagree with you. So you got to give them that. And so kind of working with them to help desensitize some of that. And so they may not be giving you the cheerleader that you were hoping for in the moment, but hopefully they can give you a decent response, a respectful response, and a productive response. And so kind of working with them on practicing how to, and coach them through how to handle those moments that are just a source of, a lot of conflict and pain in their life, quite frankly. So, this is a strange one, but this is faking negative behaviors at home when they do not naturally do so. So, this is phrased awkwardly to me as well. But the concept here is kind of like prescribing the symptom. And again, it's using it, we see in other systemic approaches, and here they're using it, and they're using, I think, more behavioral language to describe it. But you're having them do whatever the annoying behavior is to their partner, but they have control over when and where and how they do it. You're changing the context and hopefully can sometimes change the outcome. So even like, faking an argument, right? Or faking worrying, those sorts of things could just can help reframe it. And then also promoting tolerance through self-care. Um, so, so sometimes, some of the tolerance types of skills I've used with couples is, for example, let's say they came to their partner and did not get, the response they wanted from their partner. And the default mo movement or step after that, it might be to be very resentful or angry, sometimes start a fight or walk off and just feel hurt and not say anything. So sometimes the self-care for couples is to just check in. So I just want to check in, if you saw that sigh, right? Are you upset with me right now? Or, learning how to communicate, or is this okay with you? And if the partner says, no, I'm not upset, I'm just tired, you know, I consider it you self-care to just say, okay, and sometimes your partner's not going to like what you're doing. Like they're not giving you a 10 out of 10. I'm enthusiastic about your decision to work out at the gym when I wanted to watch a movie with you. But they say, yeah, go to the gym. It's fine. Yeah, they're not enthusiastic, right? But accepting that you need to make decisions for yourself. You do self-care to take care of you. If you're not getting what you need at the moment, you should be able to ask for what you want, if you, in a appropriate way from your partner, but kind of promoting some of this tolerance by also, how you kind of, in some ways, lowering your expectation and being able to manage yourself when you don't quite get the response you wanted from your partner. And I think another huge thing I've seen with couples is that so many people are so stressed out all of the time. They don't have a lot of bandwidth. And, it is in with our couple family relationships that when we don't have a lot of bandwidth, a lot of our irritability or negative bad behavior tends to come out in those relationships. And so I think that's something to also be looking at, or each of your clients, are they managing their individual stress levels at this very difficult time? I think for most people to be around on the planet, through self-care, are they getting enough sleep and exercising, eating healthy, using substances in a balanced way, right? But are they taking care of themselves? Because you do need to have a fair amount of self-regulation and self-care to be able to have the bandwidth to be in a healthy couple relationship because it requires at the individual level an ability to really manage your emotions. And if you're focusing on just managing your partner's behavior rather than your own emotions, that creates a lot of conflict. And I've found for when I can get an individual who's highly stressed to manage some of that personal stress better, that they're able to respond much more effectively in a couple relationship. And finally, what everyone really wants is the change techniques, which is introducing, some of the traditional behavior techniques to facilitate change. But they tend to start with acceptance and tolerance and helping people, learning to tolerate and accept their partners and some of those differences rather than expecting the therapist to make this magical change in the personality of their partner without changing the things they like, right? Um, so they're trying to create this sense of collaboration and willingness to change first and foremost. And so this is where they might go into more traditional cognitive behavioral communication or problem solving skills. So how to communicate, how to jointly solve problems, that sort of thing. They would use behavior exchange, quid pro quo. Normally, you don't start there, but it's certainly something. If I do this, then you can do that. That's kind of what the quid pro quo is. And so it is something that quid pro quo is something you do use at times, but it's certainly not where you should start off in couples therapy. When you see someone who's not really been trained formally in couples therapy, they will often do this, in the early phase of intervention. But behavior exchanges, I'll do the laundry if you take the kids to school or whatever, those sort of things. That's you want to do that later when the acceptance and the tolerance is there. Because if you only try to improve a couple's relationship using quid pro quo, you're not getting deep enough at some of the real painful issues to create lasting change. So, yes, do quid pro quo, but do not start there. It's definitely once there's been more healing to the emotional piece that, we can talk through this and problem solve in this way. Okay. So for those of you who are attending live, I'm going to go ahead and pop this letter of email, the place to get your letter of acceptance. And again, this is the same QR code to get your forms. But I'm going to take some live questions here, and I think some of the key takeaways, at least for me with IBCT, has been the acceptance of differences is really key. And so, and that is something like I shared with you, the MBTI thing I have found that has really been eye-opening as to, when you can get a couple to sincerely see those differences and depersonalize them, because the work becomes so much easier. So all I can say is that is really magical. You want to do that as soon as possible, is to depersonalize the conflict. And you're really helping clients kind of more consciously and responsibly navigate, intimate relationships. They are, I think, the most challenging things. Navigating couple relationships, they can also be the most rewarding things, right? But there is a lot of challenge in that. Dyadic adjustment scale. Thank you. Yes, Jason, that is exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Let's see here. Awesome, awesome. So the website to get the free forms is the Therapy That Works Institute /books. Let's see, got Attic. Okay. So Chris is saying here, sounds like a good question to add to the first six, how well they can take care of themselves. I really do agree, Chris, and I think as we live, everyone's under increasingly heavy amounts of stress. That ability to self-regulate is so important, especially if you have one member or both who are highly volatile. Um, I've noticed a huge difference, even with an antidepressant or neurofeedback or increased self-care, that creates just more bandwidth to handle intimacy. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to put the link in the chat. Oh, I see one more. I'm going to get some questions over from the Q&A. So if you're attending live, you can drop your question in the Q&A. I think I got them. Let's see. Uh, Someone's asking, how would you handle a partner saying, I just don't like him about her husband? That is definitely not a good sign. So when we talk about how highly distressed a couple is, I would consider her that is a highly distressed couple. And they might be in that, there is a point of no return, at least in my experience, I have seen that, or at least no return to a mutually satisfying relationship. You can stay married together with anyone, theoretically, right? But can they both be mutually happy? That's a different question. So if someone is saying they just don't like their husband, I would ask, do you love them? What does that mean? What's the difference? Why don't you like them? And really try to understand why they are saying that. Are they experiencing what they would consider emotional abuse? Have they just grown apart? And they just like different things now, right? So, like many couples who raise kids together very successfully. I gave the example, the one couple I had, right? One wants to be out socializing every night with friends, the other one wants to stay home. They really had totally different preferences for how to spend their time. And so they may not like so what type of, do you not respect their character or you just don't like their hobbies? You don't like hanging out with them? There's so many ways to like or dislike. Is there still love? And do you still want to be in a marriage with this, if they're married? You said husband. So is this something where you want to still be in a couple together, right? Or married together? So to explore all of that, to understand it. Someone was asking, does this work on overcoming infidelity? How would this theory work? So yeah, definitely would need to tweak it. I think all couples therapies you kind of need to tweak just a little bit to deal with infidelity. And infidelity is a funny thing. I will tell you this. I remember this was like 20 plus years ago. This was when texting just came out. There were not even smartphones. This was back in the day, probably the last century. But I was working with two different couples with infidelity who came in, started working with me at the same time. And one, the guy he'd had year-long affair twice with the same woman. Okay? For over a year. First time he got found out, he didn't see this other person for 6, 12 months, and then went back and did it again for another year. They came in to see me. My other case was my first text message affair, where it was like an emotional affair, and she was texting this friend of the family, and they had an emotional affair. As far as we know, had not kissed, as I recall, something along those two lines. And so the question is, which couple made it? Would you believe it was the text message affair that got divorced, and the other one with multiple affairs with the same person for years on end, that couple made it. So you just don't know by the behaviors as to what the intentions are of each party. And so I think, couples approach, you need to look at why there was an affair. Um, and there needs to I think most models for repairing from infidelity deal with a lot of addressing the betrayal and repairing the relationship and the trust and, working through that and taking accountability, right? So that is a real important piece to all of this into working through an affair. So, and it really comes down to, what is the intention of each person? And it's just very important that we as professionals kind of remain neutral as possible in that. So a variation of this theoretical approach could work with couples dealing with infidelity. And in some cases, that's also accepting and, unifying, analyzing what was going on in the relationship at that time. And, I've had people who, someone cheated on them. They're like, yeah, I was so frustrated about the household chores and the kids. I wasn't having, a whole lot of sex and I didn't want to have sex because I was mad, right? And so, looking at that whole picture, analyzing it, making sense of it together. Um, so a question here, how would this approach address the issues of enmeshment? Well, they would normally see it um, as difference, it's just difference of some point, because if they both agree on how close to be, right? So that with enmeshment, you would more typically have one person wanting a lot more closeness than the other. That's what you will find with most couples, are wanting it in different places, right? They want the closeness in one area, the other one wants it in another. So it's just a difference. Now, if you have the type of enmeshment where you're saying both of them are like way too much in each other's business and the other person always feel the way they feel and think the way they think, then again, you're using that concept of difference to deal with what you're calling enmeshment, which is a structural family therapy term. So, okay. So we got, oh my God, I got questions all over the place here. Okay. I got two lines of questions. Okay. Let's see. So for couples where one has had an affair, is this the best theory? I don't know if I would say it's the best theory. I know EFT has a specific protocol that they would use around that. Even strategic therapy has had some specific things for repairing. So I'm not familiar. I'm sure someone has published somewhere a repair, but with affairs, you really want to also look at how do you repair that betrayal and create safety again. So you'd have to modify, I think, every approach for that. Let's see. The next question here is, what is an example of a way to reframe, empathize, appropriate with the partner's emotions so the other doesn't feel blamed? So, and so when someone's saying, I'm trying to come up with a good example. Um, so if someone's coming in saying they really feel like their partner doesn't care about them, that they're selfish. Um, a way to reframe that is, so one of the things you're needing and hoping to get out of coming to therapy, I'm thinking of an intake here, is that you want your partner to be more in tune with where you are and what you need, or something along those lines. So you're putting it into the positive. Or, my partner just always ignores me. And, when you hear the other person's side, well, it's like, I like to just work out or I need alone time. And so, trying to reframe that. So when your partner comes home and they just need some quiet time to kind of debrief and shake off the stress of the day, you're sitting there feeling kind of isolated and alone. So a lot of times you can do that by kind of describing what each person is doing and honoring the different emotions and the different needs in a way where you humanize each person's, yeah, he needs to come home and have half an hour to mindlessly, I don't know, watch TV or sports or scroll the internet, and then he can engage. I'm getting that from him, right? So I'm helping understand. But for you, you're feeling totally, abandoned when he's there, sitting on his phone rather than talking to you, who are 4 feet away. He's lost in his phone. You feel very lonely, right? So you can always, empathize in that way. Okay, so I'm seeing questions about narcissism and victimhood and all that good stuff. And so there definitely, when you have one or both partners who have the often feeling like a victim, or one who has maybe more narcissistic traits, not very empathetic, or someone who just feels wounded all the time and attacked all the time, it's definitely much more difficult. And so what you would be doing here is using that deep assessment. What are the differences, right? The learned helplessness. And so when your partner does this, you feel like they don't care, they're not, helping you. You would look at those emotional sensitivities. Remember that it talked about the source. Where did those come from? So you would begin to look at why they may feel victimized with a certain behavior, like coming home and needing a half an hour to just to ignore your partner before you feel like ready to engage. Just understanding some of those differences. Um, and to help also depersonalizing it is helping to move people out of the victim perspective. And so a lot of when people are feeling victimized, it's because they've personalized a personality, just a difference between them and their partner, like the extrovert versus the introvert, or the highly logical versus the highly emotional. So you're going to be doing a lot of that depersonalization to help. And I will tell you, I use my Myers-Briggs and the, extrovert, introvert, sensing, intuitive, thinking, feeling, and judging, perceiving. And I get the most mileage out of my personality disorder couples. And it's bizarre. I can't explain it. I should write a paper on it and do some research, but it is because it depersonalizes conflict. So that really is helpful. Okay, any resources for understanding the shadow side or opposite poles of characteristics? Um, I in my textbooks, I do talk what I call them shadow strengths. In in my case conceptualization chapters and all my textbooks, I do talk about that aspect there, so you can probably find that. I would try to think of that complementary pattern thing and the positive framing of it. We have a lot of negative framing of it in our field, but the positive framing, you might find some of that in solution-focused literature as well. How do I approach couple work when one partner keeps bringing up parenting issues as the reason for their marital issues? You would use this exact same process that we have here. What are the differences? They can have very different philosophies. You would look at the interaction patterns because sometimes you'll have one parent being kind of dominating and, just kind of ruling out what the other person wants. And so I would look at all of those dynamics specifically, look at the themes across parenting and kind of analyze, where are these personality differences? Where can we get the two of them on the same page and how do we get them working as a team? Okay. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat here again. You will find the letter of attendance in the chat if you're attending live in the recording. Unfortunately, you don't get the attendance letter. Okay. Okay. So I think, oh, someone's asking about how do you navigate when one person has narcissistic characteristics and uses couple sessions as ammunition in a conflict. Oh, just so you know, when you do couples therapy, everything you say and will be held against you and used as a weapon when they go home. So there's a lot of that, and you want to talk about that in session and how they can handle that as a couple. There's known reliable treatment for narcissism, and I try not to judge, especially couples where the conflict's been going on. In terms of labeling people as borderline or narcissistic, a lot of people will act, borderline narcissistic. I call it they use conflict strategies that a narcissist or borderline would use. They may not be using it everywhere else, but in their relationship, they use these strategies, and I don't even know if it's helpful to get into full-blown diagnosis. I guess it is. There is a whole thing in assessing the level of severity of the narcissism, but a lot of people will use borderline narcissistic traits under pressure in a bad conflict, whether or not they have the full disorder. So, I work on naming it. I mean, not calling it abuse normally does not happen, but identifying what's going on, why that is not a healthy way to fight, and teaching them alternative ways to do it. And then it's often motivating them to use it and again, it just depends on the severity of those characteristics. So just naming the process and giving them alternatives, coaching them on alternatives and seeing what they do. And, I think our biggest challenge is motivating people to to fight in a healthier way if they're not used to. So, Annette's got a question: at what point can a therapist fail to repair a relationship? How can a therapist handle red flags for divorce or separation? So, I mean, it's unethical for us to even nudge a client in one direction or another, even when they are in what we would consider from a professional standpoint an abusive relationship. Even with physical abuse, it is not our place. It is unethical to nudge in one direction or another. And that's true whether you're doing individual or couple therapy. So it's important to realize it's not your decision. You should not be pushing. This is a huge life um, decision. And grown adults have the right to decide what type of relationship they want to be in. And can be benefits of staying with, let's say, the parent of your child. And so they get to have that. And so you want to lay out the options, help them understand, help them see, how they can shift things to, make things better for them. But again, it's their decision, and we want to always respect their autonomy. And that's one of the first things, one of our first ethical guidelines. And so if you're going to do couples work or even work with individuals complaining about their partners, you need to be very clear that you have to tread very carefully in this area. And just because you would never tolerate the behavior from their partner, you think it's abuse, it's physical abuse or whatever, it is not your job. You keep laying out and let them make those decisions. So you can refer them out if they want to keep working on their relationship and you don't feel like you can help them, I would just refer them out. Oh, Erica's saying we could use some simulations for this. Absolutely. Awesome, awesome. Okay. The letter is not in the chat. There is a link to sign up to get the letter in the chat. So, and there is no CE available for these live events. It costs money to give free CEs. So it costs money to give letters when it's not a link like this. So I give the letter for those who attend live. I don't know. Let me see. Oh, try that, people. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to talk. I'm going to put it in like 6 times so everyone can see it. I apologize. And but hopefully you can all see that letter now. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. So parent. Yeah. So I think I answered the parenting one. Um, okay. You guys are good. What do you do when a wife is a big yes, but, and then refuses to meet her husband who's trying to change? Well, um, and I'm not exactly sure what you mean by yes, but. So what I do with all my clients, and I teach this in my therapy that works Unifying Framework, is I how I know that progress is happening is I look at the symptom cycle. In this case, it's the couple conflict cycle. And I look to see where both people are consciously making choices to make that symptom cycle less severe, less frequent for everyone. So I look at that and making sure holding, with a couple, I want each person to be consciously doing things to make that cycle better. And that is where I focus on what people are doing and not just good things coming their way, right? They went on vacation or one of them got a raise at work or something like this, right? Those are totally external factors. And yes, they may be happier, they may be getting along better, but I don't, if each person isn't doing something different to create a better cycle, I don't feel like they are progressing. And if only one person is making changes to improve the cycle, like I have couples come in all the time where one person's like, I did XYZ this week to make things better. And then, and I turned to their partner, did you know they were doing this? They're like, oh, I noticed that did help. And then we're like, so what did you do? And they're like, nothing particular. I take very careful note of that because that is not a good sign. That is one person doing all the work. And so I will put more pressure on the person who didn't do anything, and to have them take conscious action to shift the cycle as well. So I hold both of them accountable. It is very easy, and I know we talked about narcissistic, and I brought up borderline behavior in couples, and it really is very important to track that and to hold both sides accountable. One of the things you will see is that if you are not good at identifying personality disorders, which most mental health professionals are not. We are not trained to do that in most master level programs. I would say more psychologists have more training in this area. I think the humanistic foundation of a lot of our kind of master level degrees, we don't want to label anyone on such a harsh diagnosis. It's terrible. It's terrible language. Personality disorder is an awful concept. I have other workshops on this. It's a horrible concept, but those patterns are pretty rigid. And what happens though, inadvertently, if you're not really trained in identifying these types of more kind of abusive, psychologically abusive, which are a lot of them are the personality disorders, cluster B specifically, if you're not used to identifying these, instinctively you're going to ask the person without a personality disorder to change because they're the ones who are going to actually change. So instinctively you know things are getting better, but you're only having one half of the dyad do all the work, and you're actually reinforcing an emotionally abusive pattern. So it's very important that you make sure both people are doing something to improve the interaction cycle, not just one. So very good. Okay. Oh dear. That is interesting. So I thought, so someone is saying that the link that they got did not work. Thought we updated this, but I will double check. Um, See what is going on here. And I will edit the forms, and I can actually edit it right now if that was not correctly updated. There's this letter of attendance. So I will edit that real quickly. Very good. It worked for you? You got the right letter? Oh, that's weird. How are people getting? No, I think you're right. I see the wrong letter. Okay. Okay. On April, I would have to agree. I'm seeing the wrong date here. So I'm gonna see. Okay. Save. There you go. You are correct. Okay. Go back to the exact same link. It should be fixed. And that, I apologize. I really thought that had been updated, and I thought I saw the update. So I'm so sorry, everyone. Gotta find a better way to automate this. Okay, well, go back in, put your name in again, and you'll get the correct letter. And now you have letter for two. If you turn that into your university, make sure you watch the other video. So I'm a big fan of doing everything with integrity. So, and it's bad karma to not do things with integrity. So, yeah, if you got the other letter, don't use it, throw it away, or watch the video if you want to get the extra credit for your university. Hope that helps. Okay, so it should be fixed on your end. I'm going to wait for confirmation from someone. If you get it, let me know. Let's see here. All fixed. Yay! I love technology when it works, and it's a nightmare when it doesn't. Yeah, we're trying to make it, trying to offer these letters, but even that is a lot of work in the background. So I apologize. Um, okay, so we got still got more questions coming in. Okay. Okay, so Cassie, I hope I answered your question with the wife is a big fat yes, but. And refuses to meet her husband who's trying to change. I would call her out on that. And there's just times in couples therapy where, and I do it gently in the beginning. I will just say, how did things go? I will do the track the interaction cycle. And so in this case, husband did XYZ, and wife, what did you do to make things better? Well, I was stressed at work, da, 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 and so I would look for that. And so what do you think you can do next week? So it's gentle, but I am direct, and I'm not letting excuses kind of come in the way of getting, couple progress and making sure both people are held accountable. Couples therapy is not for the faint of heart. You have to be willing to call people on their bad behavior. You have to be willing to interrupt people, stop things, totally take charge of the session at times. And so it is certainly, I'll be honest, couples therapy requires me to be more directive than I prefer, but it's beautiful work. It's beautiful when you can heal these relationships, but it's not for the faint of heart. Yes, this workshop will be on live on YouTube. Absolutely. This whole series is for goes on YouTube. Thank you. Thank you for posting that. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Yay. So we should okay, so what you get is an email. So Jenny's asking, should there be a letter attached? No, what you get is just an email, and your email is the letter, is the content of the letter. I hope that makes sense. And otherwise, yeah, doing individualized letters it just costs a lot of money. That's all I can say. Even doing these little letters, these automated letters, you can see it takes someone making sure that they do get that right. So, and I'm kind of transitioning with some assistance, and so obviously there's a lot of saving behind the scenes that needs to happen for that letter to go out. But hopefully it went out okay. Excellent. Well, it looks like I got most of the questions answered here. Yay. Uh-oh. There is yeah. Okay, I can fix the typo. You know what? Thank you for catching that. It's because I am typing and talking at the same time, and no one should ever ask me to do that. Okay, here we go. If you want it without the typo, go put your name in again. You get it without the typo. Oh, you're 5 month old? I love that. So Medson's 5 month old was very intrigued. Wow, that's really impressive. Love it, love it. Novia is saying my first name is Karma. Yeah, so keeps you on the straight and narrow, huh? Very good. Awesome. It worked. Excellent, excellent. Okay. Very good. So next month, I think I'm going through evidence-based group treatments for family therapy. You will find that there. And then the in that's May, and then in June I'll be going through Gottman's couple approach. Um, Very good. So yeah, and then I take July off, and we'll come back for these once a month live trainings in August, and I'll start going actually through some of the tr more traditional counseling psychotherapy theories as well. So we end up with a totally refreshed, series of YouTube lectures for psychotherapy. Awesome, awesome. Gayleen is saying, yeah, I need an assistant to help with live sessions. Yeah, so I have to type it out. I'm working on it. It's harder than you'd think to make it all work. Everyone's so busy these days. Cool. Awesome, awesome. Well, I'll be doing more simulations. I do simulations in my Therapy That Works course. I do simulations in my advanced training for Therapy That Works, which I'm going to restructure that a bit. I'm looking at trying to get some more simulations done in the fall as well. So I'm trying to just figure out simulation is a very advanced technology, which of course you got to pay for. So I'm working on figuring all of that out, but I do want to be doing more simulations in the fall. So stay tuned. Hopefully all of you all are on my mailing list where you will learn about whatever I'm up to next. But I wish you all a great afternoon and take care. And hopefully you got some good nuggets, I think, both for yourself, hopefully personally, as well as your clients, and wish you all the best. So, and then, yeah, the advanced therapy is I'm reworking what the level 2 Therapy That Works course is going to look like. And so I'm kind of reimagining that. So yeah, so stay tuned for that as well to do to kind of go deeper and working with clients and doing the simulations across time so we get to work with the same client multiple times. Should be good. Okay, everyone, I wish you lots of luck. Take care, be well, and I look forward to hopefully having you join me next month. Oh, someone's asking what are simulations? Simulations are a mixed they're they're a mixed reality client that is totally lifelike, and but what's beautiful about simulation training is that we can pause a session and it's like live supervision. I can tell you what to say. And I'm kind of your co-therapist in simulation. So you do the talking and I kind of give you I nudge you in which direction or what to say and how to go and how to handle how to handle things. And so it's just the easiest, most fun, safest way to learn how to do this work well. And so it's really the kind of the cutting edge and training and supervision in the field. And so, but it is an expensive technology. And so, but I'm trying to get more of it to happen in the Institute. So it is, yeah. So Eric is saying you will love simulation. It is. It's Disneyland for therapists. It is totally fun. We laugh, we cry, we have a great time. And so yeah, it's absolutely a blast. So I'm hoping to do more of it in the fall and trying to make it, accessible as much as possible. Okay, everyone, this has been so much fun. I wish you all a great rest of your day. Take care, and I hope to see you next month. Bye-bye.